Yeah, Joe, we now have a clearer picture. This morning, the United States and the European Union released a joint statement detailing the specifics of a trade agreement. First announced earlier this summer, under this new framework, the U.S. will impose tariffs of up to 15% on European imports, while Europe has agreed to remove duties on American industrial goods, expand access for U.S. agriculture and seafood, and commit to major energy and technology purchases. At the same time, North America is seeing its own trade developments unfold. Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke with President Donald Trump today, weeks after Canada missed the August 1st trade deadline. The Canadian government described the call as substantive and productive, signaling that dialogue has resumed, even though a deal is not yet finalized. Meanwhile, the EU deal is already progressing. Europe has agreed to preferential market access for U.S. goods, including agriculture, seafood, dairy, fresh and processed fruits, vegetables, soybean oil, and pork and bison meat. However, the agreement also highlights the Trump approach to trade. European businesses gain clarity, but tariffs remain at 15% rather than returning to zero. Cuts on European car tariffs will only take effect after changes to EU regulations. Strategic commitments were secured for the U.S., including around $750 billion in energy purchases through 2028, plus $40 billion for American AI chips. Pharmaceuticals now face a ceiling of 15%, far below the previously threatened 250%. In short, Trump threatens high, settles lower, but keeps leverage in U.S. hands, all part of a broader move to bypass the WTO and pursue bilateral deals. For Europe, securing access to the U.S. market left limited options. Canada, on the other hand, is moving more cautiously. After missing the August deadline, Prime Minister Carney engaged Trump directly. While the conversation covered trade challenges and security priorities, no tariff concessions were mentioned. Analysts note that in Trump's world, trade is closely tied to foreign policy. Rather than rushing, Canada is exercising strategic patience, unwilling to accept a fixed tariff ceiling just to secure a deal. Carney has signaled that Canada will only sign a fair deal, not a fast one. Meanwhile, the government is strengthening ties with Mexico, preparing for a more unified North American approach. By holding back, Canada protects key industries like softwood lumber, steel, and supply-managed agriculture, preserving its leverage. Is Trump rational and easy to negotiate with? Many experts say absolutely not. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has warned that Trump could reopen or even walk away from USMCA before its review, possibly as soon as November. Such a move carries risks for the U.S., given its reliance on Canadian oil, gas, electricity, minerals, and integrated auto supply chains. While Europe accepted certainty at 15% tariffs, Canada holds stronger bargaining power, especially with energy exports totaling around $150 billion in 2024. In the coming months, Canada will need to navigate the same storm that Europe faced, carefully leveraging its advantages without making unnecessary concessions. The United States is setting a global tariff framework, essentially asking the rest of the world to pay up if they want access to the American market. Remember the campaign promise of 90 trade deals in 90 days? Well, not all of those deals were intended to be final agreements. Talks with Vietnam, the UK, and China were ongoing, with details still unfolding. At the start of August, President Donald Trump declared victory. His global tariff campaign had forced allies into rapid agreements before the deadline, promising stability with tariff caps around 15% in exchange for major U.S. investment pledges. On paper, it looked like a win. In practice, details remain vague, and industries in partner countries are still feeling the strain. Washington's message is straightforward: invest heavily in the U.S. or risk higher tariffs. Allies from Europe to Asia are weighing short-term relief against massive commitments and the possibility that Trump could change course at any moment. Japan's automotive sector highlights the limits of these agreements. According to the World Trade Organization, the average U.S. tariff now exceeds 20%, the highest in over a century. Japanese automakers are facing real costs. Mazda alone expects nearly $1 billion in additional expenses this year. To cope, the company is ramping up output at a $2 billion Alabama plant built during Trump's first term. While this investment softens the blow, half of Mazda's cars are still produced in Japan, and a large Mexican factory remains exposed until terms with Mexico are finalized. The result? Uncertainty, not stability. Europe faces a similar challenge. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen notes that a framework trade agreement with the U.S. provides support for the metal sector, but details remain scarce. Brussels reached an agreement promising tariff cuts and quotas, yet steel and aluminum still face a 50% duty. The quota system, which could allow some duty-free exports, has yet to be fully defined. According to the European Steel Association, U.S. tariffs have already cost the industry over $90 billion annually and led to weakened demand. Business leaders are left with little more than promises, showing that rushing to sign deals has not removed economic pressure. Canada, however, has chosen a more measured path. Ottawa refused to sign under pressure, accepting a 35% tariff on goods outside USMCA as of August 1st. While this sounds severe, the vast majority of Canadian trade remains exempt. Scotia Bank chief economist Jean-François Peralta notes that 85 to 95% of exports are still tariff-free under the deal. On average, Canada's effective tariff rate is about 5 to 6% painful, but lower than the 15% faced by Europe, Japan, or South Korea. Rather than tying its future to Washington's demands, Canada is focusing inward. Recent meetings between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Ontario Premier Doug Ford emphasized building national competitiveness and resilience, investing in affordability, security, and major domestic projects. Some Canadians question whether the government is being too passive in the face of Trump's tariffs. But data suggests Canada has avoided the harshest outcomes, while maintaining leverage for future negotiations, unlike other partners who promised hundreds of billions in investments. Canada has not mortgaged its long-term position for short-term relief. As Carney emphasized during the election campaign, no deal is better than a bad deal. Canada will not rush into a deal that undermines its interests, choosing strategy over haste. The contrast is clear. Nations that rushed to sign deals before August 1st now face heavy investment costs and ongoing uncertainty. Japan's automakers and Europe's steel industry show that pain does not disappear after agreements are inked. Canada, by holding firm, absorbed targeted damage in certain sectors while keeping the broader economy intact and its negotiating leverage alive. This is not surrender, it's a strategy of endurance. With energy exports, critical minerals, and integrated supply chains, Canada remains a partner the United States cannot easily replace. While tariffs may escalate, Prime Minister Mark Carney's measured approach demonstrates that strategic patience is the strongest counterweight to Washington's unpredictable demands. Former Canadian Minister of International Trade, Mary, notes that 35% tariffs on key industries are unsustainable for both sides. While these tariffs raise costs for Canadian exporters, higher prices are ultimately absorbed by American businesses, manufacturers, and consumers. She highlights the deep integration of the North American supply chain. Over 90% of Canadian exports to the U.S. remain USMCA compliant and tariff-free, including autos and energy. Her position is clear. Canada should secure a good deal, not just any deal, to reduce reliance on the U.S. Ottawa is also strengthening trade ties through the CPTPP and agreements with Europe and Asia. This diversification, combined with the ability to keep compliant trade flowing, gives Canada significant negotiating leverage. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has launched a $1 billion program to provide emergency loans to businesses most affected by U.S. tariffs, including steel, aluminum, and auto manufacturers. Eligibility requires at least 10 employees, $2 million in annual revenue, and prior participation in federal tariff support programs. Loan amounts range from $250,000 to $40 million, repayable within 6 years, aimed at stabilizing payrolls, facilities, and essential operating costs, preventing layoffs or closures. Ford is also actively promoting Ontario's industrial base by offering tax cuts, GST reductions, and urging the Bank of Canada to lower interest rates. This approach is proactive protection rather than waiting for concessions from Washington. On his 200th day in office, President Trump imposed new tariffs on dozens of countries worldwide. While recent CBS News polls show that Americans generally believe the economy is strong, the majority expect prices to rise in the coming months. U.S. companies, meanwhile, are navigating these shifts in real time, balancing the pressures of tariffs, supply chains, and investment commitments. While Canada continues to strengthen its negotiating position, the United States is beginning to feel the pressure points of its own sweeping tariff campaign. A striking example aired on CBS Evening News focused on a small family-run store, West Side Kids, which sourced 90% of its products from China. When the U.S. implemented new tariffs on Chinese imports this summer, the store simply could not absorb the added costs or the resulting drop in consumer spending. The business closed its doors permanently, marking one of the many casualties of this ongoing trade clash. Across the United States, small businesses face similar challenges. Without the buying power or storage capacity of larger retailers, they are hit quickly by higher import costs. Consumers, in turn, pull back on spending as prices rise. According to the Yale Budget Lab, the 2025 tariff measures could cost American households an additional $2,200 to $3,800 per year, a burden that falls hardest on lower-income families. This latest tariff clash highlights two distinct strategies. President Trump is leveraging economic pressure to push Canada toward his terms. Meanwhile, Canada, under Prime Minister Mark Carney and provincial leaders like Doug Ford, is countering with targeted domestic support, strategic diplomacy, and a refusal to settle for a bad deal. The fallout is already visible in the U.S., where small businesses shudder, consumers face higher prices, and industries grapple with disrupted supply chains. This is not simply a trade dispute, it is a test of endurance. Canada is signaling that it is willing to endure short-term strain to safeguard long-term gains. With resources such as energy exports, critical minerals, and an integrated supply chain, Canada remains a partner the United States cannot easily replace. The question for Washington becomes whether its tariff strategy can deliver results. Before the economic costs at home become too high, the impact is tangible for everyday products. Consider children's clothing. Before tariffs, a shirt might have retailed for $6.98. After the measures, the same product could climb to $10.98. A $4 increase that hits families directly. In the early hours of August 7th, 2025. President Trump activated his long-planned global tariff package, imposing duties ranging from 10% to 50% on more than 90 countries, pushing the average U.S. import rate above 17%, the highest since the Great Depression. Canada was already on the list since August 1st. A higher tariff tier has applied to Canadian goods outside USMCA rules, part of a broader offensive that also targeted the European Union, India, Brazil, and Mexico. The goal was simple: hit multiple partners at once to extract faster concessions. However, as weeks passed, the strain began to boomerang back on the U.S. economy. Prices are rising for American consumers as these sweeping tariffs take effect. According to Cox Automotive, new car prices are projected to climb 4 to 8% in 2025, while Ford, which produces most vehicles domestically, has already paid about $1 billion in tariff costs, raising prices on Mexico-built models. The Yale budget lab estimates that shoe prices could surge 40% and clothing 38%, as tariffs on Vietnam and India squeeze global footwear and apparel brands. Household staples like olive oil from Europe, Brazilian coffee under a 50% tariff, and aluminum for beer cans from Mexico are all climbing in price. Some importers initially absorb the cost, but as retailers warn, thin margins cannot hold indefinitely. Walmart has already signaled that higher shelf prices are inevitable, while smaller stores feel the pinch much sooner. This inflationary pressure, combined with Trump's push for lower interest rates, has raised concerns about a double whammy effect on American consumer prices across Canada. The tariff threat has prompted a nationwide response. Grocery stores and supply shops now often highlight Canadian-made products with clear labels, encouraging domestic purchasing. Prime Minister Mark Carney held firm on Canada's 25% retaliatory tariffs, targeting U.S. goods in strategically important sectors. By maintaining these measures, Canada ensured that the discomfort was felt not only by corporations, but by lawmakers in Washington, reinforcing Canada's bargaining position. Ontario Premier Doug Ford amplified this strategy by pushing for clear origin labeling and publicly criticizing companies outsourcing production. This unified political front sent a strong signal. Canada's leadership is aligned, prepared, and committed to protecting domestic industry. At the same time, Canada accelerated trade diversification, strengthening relationships with the EU, UK, and Mexico, reducing dependence on the U.S. market just as American import costs were rising. The combination of targeted tariffs, domestic unity, and new trade channels transformed Canada's defensive posture into a calculated offensive, allowing Ottawa to press its advantage while the U.S. faced growing economic pressure at home. Trump began August expecting quick compliance from partners, but his global tariff web ended up applying economic pressure across U.S. industries and households. Canada, by contrast, maintained countermeasures, reinforced domestic production, and diversified exports, positioning itself as an active, not subordinate, player. The contest is now a measured standoff. The U.S. wields market scale, while Canada holds supply chain and resource leverage. The final outcome remains uncertain. But one fact is clear: tariffs designed to force Canada into retreat have instead created a more balanced battlefield, allowing Ottawa to negotiate from strength and shape the terms of the next move.